When I first stepped through the glass doors of Peterson and Associates in downtown Seattle back in 2017, I thought I'd found my career home. The technology consulting firm specialized in enterprise solutions for Fortune 500 companies. And at 26, fresh out of my master's program at the University of Washington, I was eager to prove myself in the corporate world. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The building itself was impressive. 32 floors of gleaming steel and glass overlooking Elliott Bay. The lobby featured polished marble floors and modern art installations that probably cost more than my annual salary. Everything screamed success and sophistication, exactly the kind of environment where I imagined building my professional legacy. Sarah Peterson, the company's founder and CEO, interviewed me personally for the systems integration analyst position. She was a sharp woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they observed. During our meeting, she outlined an ambitious vision for the company's growth and emphasized how crucial it would be to have dedicated employees who could adapt and evolve with the business. "We're not just looking for someone to fill a role," she explained, gesturing toward the cityscape beyond her corner office windows. "We need individuals who can think strategically, solve complex problems, and essentially become the connective tissue that holds our various departments together." Does that sound like something you'd be interested in pursuing? I assured her it was exactly what I wanted. The starting salary was competitive, the benefits package seemed comprehensive, and the opportunity for advancement appeared limitless. Most importantly, the work itself sounded intellectually challenging and professionally rewarding. My first few months exceeded every expectation. I was assigned to the Enterprise Solutions Department under the supervision of David Richardson, a veteran consultant with 20 years of experience in systems integration. David proved to be an excellent mentor, who understood both the technical complexities of our projects and the political dynamics of client relationships. The Enterprise Solutions Department handled the company's largest accounts, multinational corporations, requiring sophisticated technology implementations that could span multiple years and involve dozens of team members. These projects demanded not only technical expertise, but also exceptional project management skills, client communication abilities, and the capacity to coordinate efforts across multiple departments within Peterson and Associates. My role initially focused on data analysis and system mapping for client implementations. I would spend hours reviewing existing IT infrastructures, identifying inefficiencies, and developing recommendations for improvement. The work required meticulous attention to detail and the ability to translate complex technical concepts into language that non-technical stakeholders could understand and act upon. Within 6 months, I had established myself as someone who could be trusted with increasingly complex responsibility. David began assigning me direct client contact duties, allowing me to participate in meetings with executives from major corporations who were investing millions of dollars in our recommendation. These interactions taught me invaluable lessons about business communication, stakeholder management, and the art of building confidence in technical solutions. By my first anniversary with the company, I had been promoted to Senior Systems Integration Analyst with a corresponding salary increase and expanded responsibilities. I was now leading smaller project teams and serving as the primary liaison between our technical staff and client organization. The work was demanding but incredibly fulfilling, and I felt like I was building exactly the kind of career I had envisioned. However, it was during this period of professional growth that I began to notice something peculiar about the company's operational structure. Despite having clearly defined departments with specific responsibilities, enterprise solutions, infrastructure management, client relations, and business development, there seemed to be significant gaps in communication and coordination between these groups. Projects would frequently encounter delays because information wasn't flowing properly between departments. Client relations would make commitments without consulting with enterprise solutions about technical feasibility. Business development would promise delivery timelines that infrastructure management couldn't realistically meet. These inefficiencies were costing the company both time and money, and more importantly, they were beginning to impact client satisfaction. Rather than simply observing these problems, I began taking initiative to address them. During my lunch breaks and after regular work hours, I started developing informal communication channels between departments. I would stop by infrastructure management to discuss upcoming project requirements, check in with client relations about potential concerns from our major accounts, and coordinate with business development to ensure that new proposals aligned with our technical capability. These efforts weren't part of my official job description, but they seemed natural and necessary. I enjoyed the challenge of understanding how different aspects of the business interconnected, and I found satisfaction in solving problems that extended beyond my immediate responsibility. More importantly, these cross-departmental relationships were making me more effective in my primary role as a systems analyst. David Richardson noticed my expanded involvement and was thoroughly supportive. During my annual performance review, he specifically praised my initiative in building bridges between departments and suggested that this kind of systems thinking would be valuable as I continued advancing within the company. "Marcus has demonstrated exceptional ability to see the bigger picture," he wrote in my evaluation. "His willingness to understand and contribute to processes outside his immediate scope of responsibility makes him an invaluable asset to the organization. I strongly recommend him for continued advancement and increased leadership responsibilities." By my second year with Peterson and Associates, I had essentially become an unofficial coordinator for cross-departmental initiatives. Whenever projects required collaboration between multiple groups, my colleagues would naturally turn to me for guidance and coordination. I had developed relationships with key personnel in every department, understood the strengths and limitations of each group, and had earned a reputation as someone who could facilitate communication and problem-solving across organizational boundaries. This expanded role was both professionally rewarding and personally satisfying. I felt like I was contributing to the company's success in ways that extended far beyond my original job description, and I was learning about aspects of business operations that most employees at my level never had the opportunity to understand. The work was challenging and demanding, but it was also positioning me for significant career advancement. During this time, I also took on additional responsibilities in training new employees. As Peterson and Associates continued growing and hiring new staff, I became the person who helped orient new analysts to our systems and process. I developed training materials, conducted orientation sessions, and served as a mentor for junior staff members who were still learning the complexities of enterprise consulting. The training responsibilities provided me with deeper insights into the company's operational procedures and highlighted additional opportunities for improvement. New employees would often ask questions that revealed inefficiencies or gaps in our existing processes, and I began documenting these observations with the intention of eventually proposing systematic improvement. My relationship with the company's leadership during this period was positive and professionally rewarding. Sarah Peterson would occasionally ask for my input on operational questions, and other executives seemed to respect my growing expertise in cross-departmental coordination. I felt valued and appreciated, and I believed that my contributions were being recognized and rewarded appropriately. The compensation increases and expanded responsibilities seemed to validate my approach of going above and beyond my official job description. I was earning more money than I had ever imagined possible at this stage of my career, and I was working on projects that were both intellectually stimulating and professionally significant. However, looking back, I realized that this period of growth and recognition was also laying the foundation for the problems that would eventually emerge. By making myself indispensable to so many different aspects of the company's operations, I was creating dependencies that I didn't fully understand. My willingness to take on additional responsibilities without clearly defined boundaries or formal recognition was establishing patterns that would later become problematic. The informal nature of my expanded role meant that much of my most valuable work was invisible to the company's formal evaluation and compensation system. While I was receiving praise and moderate pay increases, the actual scope of my contributions was significantly undervalued because it didn't fit neatly into traditional job categories or performance metrics. More importantly, I was developing skills and knowledge that were becoming crucial to the company's daily operations, but these capabilities weren't being formally documented or systematically transferred to other employees. Instead of building institutional capacity, I was inadvertently creating a situation where critical business processes were increasingly dependent on my personal involvement and expertise. By the end of my second year, I had become what business analysts call a single point of failure, an individual whose departure would create significant operational disruption. Unfortunately, this reality wasn't recognized or acknowledged by the company's leadership, who continued to view me as a talented but ultimately replaceable employee, rather than as someone who had become integral to their organizational infrastructure. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would ultimately reveal the true cost of undervaluing essential employees and the dangerous consequences of taking critical contributors for granted. But at the time, I was simply focused on doing excellent work and building a successful career, completely unaware of the leverage I was unknowingly accumulating, or the dramatic events that this leverage would eventually enable. My third year at Peterson and Associates began with what seemed like a positive development. The company had landed its largest contract to date, a 3-year, $40 million digital transformation project with Meridian Financial Group, one of the nation's top investment firms. The project would require coordinating efforts across all 4 departments and managing a team of over 50 consultants and analysts. When Sarah Peterson called me into her office on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, I expected to discuss my role in this massive undertaking. Instead, she delivered news that would fundamentally alter my relationship with the company. "Marcus, I want you to meet someone," she said, gesturing toward a man in an expensive navy suit, who had been examining the architectural drawings mounted on her wall. "This is Jonathan Blackwood. He's joining us as our new director of operations." Blackwood turned and extended a firm handshake. He was probably in his early 40s, with perfectly styled dark hair, and the kind of confident smile that suggested he was accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His LinkedIn profile, which I discreetly reviewed later that day, revealed an MBA from Harvard and previous executive positions at 2 major consulting firms. "If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel." Now back to where we left off. "I've heard excellent things about your work here," Blackwood said with practiced charm. "Sarah tells me you've been instrumental in coordinating cross-departmental initiatives. I'm looking forward to working with someone who understands the operational complexities of our business." The conversation that followed revealed the company's new organizational structure. Blackwood would oversee all operational activities, with department heads reporting directly to him instead of to Sarah Peterson. This change was designed to allow Sarah to focus on strategic planning and business development, while ensuring that day-to-day operations received dedicated executive attention. On the surface, this seemed like a reasonable evolution for a growing company. However, what became clear over the following weeks was that Blackwood had been hired not just to manage operations, but to implement a specific vision of how the company should function, a vision that didn't align with the organic systems that had developed over the previous 3 years. Blackwood's approach to management was heavily influenced by corporate efficiency models he had encountered at larger consulting firms. He believed in rigid hierarchical structures, formalized communication protocols, and standardized processes that could be easily measured and replicated. These principles weren't inherently problematic, but their implementation at Peterson and Associates created immediate friction with the collaborative culture that had evolved naturally. Within his first month, Blackwood instituted a series of changes that disrupted existing workflow. He required all interdepartmental communications to be routed through designated liaisons, rather than allowing direct contact between team members. He implemented new project management software that required extensive documentation for every task and decision. Most significantly, he reorganized team assignments to eliminate what he called role ambiguity and ensure that every employee had clearly defined responsibilities. These changes had a particularly dramatic impact on my work. Much of my value to the company had come from my ability to move fluidly between departments, understanding different perspectives and facilitating communication across organizational boundaries. Under the new system, this kind of cross-functional coordination was discouraged in favor of formal channels that were slower and less flexible. During my first quarterly review under Blackwood's management, the philosophical differences between his approach and my working style became explicit. He praised my technical skills and work quality, but expressed concern about what he termed my tendency to operate outside established parameters. "Marcus, you're clearly talented, but I need you to understand that our growth requires more disciplined approaches to task management," he explained while reviewing my performance metrics on his tablet. The informal coordination you've been doing might have worked when we were smaller, but it's not scalable for an organization of our current size and ambition. I attempted to explain how my cross-departmental work had contributed to project success and client satisfaction, providing specific examples of problems I had solved and efficiencies I had created. Blackwood listened politely but remained unconvinced. I appreciate your initiative, but we need to trust our systems rather than relying on individual heroics, he responded. Moving forward, I'd like you to focus on your core responsibilities as a senior systems integration analyst. If you have concerns about interdepartmental coordination, please bring them to my attention through proper channels. This conversation marked the beginning of a subtle but persistent campaign to constrain my role within the company. Blackwood began reassigning responsibilities that I had handled for years to other employees or to newly created formal positions. The training programs I had developed were transferred to human resources. The client relationship management duties I had gradually assumed were given to designated account managers and client relations. Initially, I tried to adapt these changes professionally. I focused on my technical analysis work and attempted to operate within the new organizational structure. However, it quickly became apparent that the formal systems Blackwood had implemented were creating the very inefficiencies they were supposed to eliminate. Projects that had previously moved smoothly through integrated team collaboration now faced delays as information moved through multiple approval layers. Client issues that I had once resolved through direct communication with relevant departments now required formal tickets and scheduled meetings. The Meridian Financial Project, which should have been our showcase success, began experiencing significant problems as coordination breakdowns led to missed deadlines and budget overruns. The irony was that while Blackwood had restricted my official role, people throughout the company continued to seek my input on operational issues. Colleagues would approach me informally for advice on technical problems, client concerns, and process improvement. However, because these interactions were no longer formally recognized or supported, I found myself in an increasingly awkward position. When I tried to help colleagues navigate the new systems, I risked being seen as undermining Blackwood's authority. When I followed the formal procedures, problems that I could have quickly resolved instead festered and grew more complex. I was being forced to choose between being helpful and being compliant, a situation that created professional and ethical tensions I had never experienced before. The situation deteriorated further when Blackwood hired external consultants to conduct what he called an operational efficiency audit. The consulting team, led by a woman named Jennifer Walsh from a prestigious management consulting firm, spent 3 weeks interviewing employees and analyzing company processes. I participated in several interviews with Walsh's team, describing my role in the company and the various responsibilities I had developed over the years. The consultants seemed particularly interested in my cross-departmental coordination activities and asked detailed questions about how these processes had evolved and what value they created. When the audit results were presented to the leadership team, I expected that my contributions would be formally recognized and that recommendations would be made to better integrate cross-functional coordination into the company's official structure. Instead, the opposite occurred. The audit report concluded that Peterson and Associates had developed excessive informal dependencies that created operational vulnerabilities and management oversight gaps. The consultants recommended further centralization of decision-making authority and the elimination of unofficial coordination channels that bypassed formal reporting structure. Most damaging to my position was a specific recommendation that the company redistribute specialized knowledge and relationships to prevent overconcentration of critical capabilities in individual employees. While the report didn't mention me by name, it was clearly referring to the role I had developed over the previous 3 years. Blackwood embraced these recommendations enthusiastically. He announced a restructuring initiative that would professionalize our operational systems and eliminate dependencies on what he termed legacy informal processes. The clear implication was that my approach to cross-departmental coordination was not just unnecessary but actively harmful to the company's efficiency and growth prospects. The restructuring involved reassigning many of my long-standing responsibilities to newly hired specialists. A project coordination manager was brought in to handle interdepartmental communication, A client success director was hired to manage account relationships. A process improvement analyst was tasked with identifying and resolving operational inefficiencies. These new hires were all competent professionals with impressive credentials, but they lacked the institutional knowledge and established relationships that had made my coordination efforts effective. More importantly, they were operating within Blackwood's formal system constraints, which meant they couldn't replicate the flexible, responsive approach that had made my work valuable. The results were predictable and immediate. Project coordination became slower and more bureaucratic. Client relationships became more transactional and less personal. Process improvements were identified through formal analysis rather than emerging from day-to-day operational experience. Meanwhile, my official role was being systematically diminished. Tasks that had once been considered part of my core responsibilities were either eliminated or transferred to other departments. My input on major projects was no longer solicited, and my recommendations on operational improvements were increasingly ignored or dismissed. The psychological impact of this professional marginalization was significant. After years of feeling valued and integral to the company's success, I was experiencing what workplace psychologists call role erosion, the gradual reduction of meaningful responsibilities and organizational influence. I found myself arriving at work each morning with less enthusiasm and leaving each evening with greater frustration. More concerning was the impact on the company's performance. The Meridian Financial project continued to struggle with coordination problems and budget overruns. Other major clients began expressing dissatisfaction with our service quality and responsiveness. Employee morale in several departments declined as the new formal systems created additional bureaucracy without improving actual outcome. During this period, I made several attempts to address these issues through proper channels. I scheduled meetings with Blackwood to discuss specific operational problems and proposed solutions based on my experience with similar challenges. I submitted detailed reports analyzing the root causes of project delays and client satisfaction issues. I even offered to work with the newly hired specialists to transfer my institutional knowledge and established relationships. These efforts were uniformly unsuccessful. Blackwood consistently responded to my concerns by emphasizing the importance of following established procedures and trusting the new organizational system. He seemed to interpret my attempts to help as implicit criticism of his management approach, which only reinforced his determination to limit my influence within the company. The breaking point came during a leadership meeting in late September. I had been invited to present an analysis on the Meridian Financial project's performance issues, which had grown serious enough to threaten the contract renewal that would be worth another $30 million over the following 2 years. My presentation outlined specific coordination failures that were causing delays and cost overruns, and I proposed targeted interventions that could address these problems quickly and effectively. The recommendations drew on my understanding of both the client's expectations and our internal capabilities, and they represented solutions that I was confident could be implemented successfully. Blackwood's response was swift and dismissive. "Marcus, I appreciate your technical analysis, but I think you're missing the bigger picture here," he said, barely looking up from his tablet. "These are exactly the kinds of problems we hired specialists to address. Rather than trying to solve everything yourself, you should trust our systems and focus on your core responsibilities." Sarah Peterson, who had remained largely silent during the organizational changes of the previous months, finally spoke up. "Jonathan, Marcus has been dealing with these kinds of coordination challenges for years. Maybe we should consider his recommendations." Blackwood's jaw tightened slightly, but his tone remained professionally controlled. "Sarah, with respect, that's exactly the problem. We can't continue to rely on individual expertise when we need systematic solutions. Marcus is a talented analyst, but he's not irreplaceable. We need to build systems that don't depend on any single person's knowledge or relationships." The word irreplaceable hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah nodded slowly, apparently accepting Blackwood's logic, and the meeting moved on to other topics. But for me, something fundamental had shifted. After 3 years of contributing to the company's success in ways that extended far beyond my job description, I had just been explicitly told that my contributions were not only unvalued but actively unwanted. That evening, I sat in my apartment overlooking the Seattle waterfront and began to seriously consider what my future at Peterson and Associates might look like. The company I had joined with such enthusiasm and optimism had become a place where my most valuable skills were seen as problematic and my most significant contributions were being systematically eliminated. For the first time since joining the company, I began to wonder if it might be time to explore other opportunities. The thought was both liberating and terrifying, but it was also becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. October brought an unusually harsh Seattle winter, with rain that seemed to mirror the increasingly toxic atmosphere at Peterson and Associates. The Meridian Financial Project had officially entered crisis mode, with client executives scheduling emergency meetings to address what they diplomatically termed service delivery concerns. Behind closed doors, their language was far less diplomatic. I learned about the severity of the situation through an unlikely source, Rebecca Martinez, a junior analyst in client relations, who had started at the company around the same time as me. Rebecca and I had developed a professional friendship over the years, bonded by our shared experience of watching the company evolve from a collaborative startup environment to the rigid corporate structure it had become under Blackwood's leadership. "Marcus, they're talking about terminating the Meridian contract," she confided during a chance encounter in the building's coffee shop. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and she kept glancing around to ensure we weren't being overheard. "The client called Sarah directly yesterday. They're saying we've failed to deliver on basic project milestones, and that our communication has been completely dysfunctional." The irony was almost too perfect to believe. The same project that should have been showcasing Peterson and Associates' capabilities under the new organizational structure was instead becoming a public demonstration of its failure. The formal communication channels that Blackwood had insisted would improve efficiency had created a bureaucratic maze where critical information got lost or delayed. The specialized roles that were supposed to eliminate dangerous dependencies had instead created gaps where nobody took responsibility for comprehensive problem solving. What made the situation even more frustrating was that I could see exactly how to fix most of the underlying issues. The problems weren't technical, they were coordination failures that stemmed directly from the elimination of the informal communication networks that had previously kept projects on track. But my attempts to offer solutions had been consistently rejected, and I was no longer invited to the high-level meetings where strategic decisions were being made. The crisis deepened when Meridian Financial's chief technology officer, Elizabeth Chen, no relation despite sharing my surname, flew in from New York for what the company euphemistically called a partnership review meeting. Chen was known throughout the financial technology industry as someone who didn't tolerate incompetence or excuses, and her unexpected arrival sent panic through Peterson and Associates executive ranks. I wasn't included in the initial meetings with Dr. Chen, but the aftermath was impossible to ignore. Blackwood emerged from the conference room looking like he'd been physically struck, while Sarah Peterson wore the expression of someone calculating how much a contract termination would cost in both financial and reputational terms. The following day, I received an urgent email from David Richardson, my original supervisor who had been marginalized under the new organizational structure, but retained enough influence to stay informed about major development. He asked me to meet him for lunch at a small restaurant several blocks away from the office, a location choice that immediately suggested the conversation would involve sensitive topics. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," David said after we had ordered and confirmed that no other Peterson and Associates employees were within earshot. "Do you think you could salvage the Meridian project if you were given full authority to coordinate the technical implementation?" The question caught me off guard, not because I hadn't considered it, but because I hadn't expected anyone in leadership to seek my opinion on the matter. "Honestly, yes, I think I could. The technical work isn't the problem, it's the coordination breakdowns, but that would require bypassing most of the formal processes that Blackwood has implemented." David nodded grimly. "That's what I was afraid you'd say. Sarah is meeting with Dr. Chen again this afternoon, and there's talk about bringing in external crisis management consultants to try to save the contract. The problem is that everyone knows the real issue isn't technical expertise. It's the organizational dysfunction that's preventing our people from working effectively." He paused to take a sip of his coffee, then continued with obvious reluctance. There's also talk about making you the scapegoat for the coordination failure. Blackwood is arguing that the problems stem from residual dependencies on the informal systems you used to manage, and that the solution is to complete the transition to formalized processes more aggressively. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only was my expertise being rejected as a solution to the crisis, but my previous contributions were being reframed as the root cause of current problem. It was a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting. Blame the person whose methods had previously worked for the failures of the system that had replaced those methods. David, that's completely insane, I said, probably more loudly than I should have in a public restaurant. The coordination problems started when they eliminated the informal networks, not before. The Meridian project was running smoothly until they restructured everything. I know that, and you know that, but Blackwood has convinced Sarah that the solution is doubling down on formal processes, rather than acknowledging that the formal processes are the problem. He's also suggested that your continued presence is making it harder for the new systems to function properly because people keep turning to you instead of following official channels. The conversation continued for another hour, but the essential message was clear. My position at Peterson and Associates had become untenable. The company was facing a major crisis that I could potentially help resolve, but the leadership was more interested in protecting their organizational philosophy than in actually solving problems. Worse, they were preparing to blame me for the consequences of their own decision. That afternoon, I returned to the office with a new perspective on my situation. Instead of feeling frustrated or disappointed, I felt something approaching clarity. The company had made its priorities clear. They valued the appearance of systematic management more than actual results, and they were willing to sacrifice both employee expertise and client satisfaction to maintain that appearance. Over the following week, I began conducting what I privately called my departure audit. I systematically documented every process, relationship, and piece of institutional knowledge that would be lost when I left the company. The exercise was both professionally responsible and personally enlightening. It revealed the full scope of how extensively my unofficial coordination work had become woven into the company's daily operations. The documentation revealed some startling reality. I had active relationships with key personnel in every major client organization, many of whom contacted me directly when they had concerns or questions. I maintained informal communication networks that enabled rapid problem-solving across all 4 departments. I possessed detailed knowledge of every major project's history, including the technical decisions and client negotiations that weren't captured in formal documentation. Most importantly, I had developed troubleshooting expertise that allowed me to quickly diagnose and resolve the kinds of coordination failures that were currently plaguing the Meridian project. This expertise hadn't been developed through formal training. It had evolved through years of hands-on experience with the specific challenges of Peterson and Associates' client base and organizational culture. The departure audit also revealed how thoroughly the company had failed to create systematic replacements for my informal coordination functions. The newly hired specialists had impressive credentials but lacked the contextual knowledge necessary to be effective. The formal communication processes looked good on organizational charts, but created delays and information bottlenecks in practice. Meanwhile, the crisis with Meridian Financial continued to escalate. Chen had extended her stay in Seattle and was conducting what amounted to a forensic audit of the project's failure. She was interviewing individual team members, reviewing project documentation, and systematically identifying every breakdown in communication and coordination that had contributed to the delays and cost overruns. Through Rebecca Martinez, I learned that Dr. Chen's investigation was uncovering exactly the kinds of problems I had anticipated. The formal processes that were supposed to ensure accountability had instead created situations where nobody took responsibility for overall project success. The specialized roles that were supposed to improve efficiency had created silos where departments worked at cross purposes. Most damagingly, Chen had discovered that critical technical decisions were being made by people who lacked sufficient context about the client's business requirements, while people who understood those requirements weren't being consulted about technical implementation. It was a textbook example of how organizational structure could undermine operational effectiveness. The breaking point came during the third week of October, when Blackwood called me into his office for what he described as a performance optimization discussion. The meeting was scheduled for late Friday afternoon, a timing choice that suggested he anticipated a difficult conversation. "Marcus, I want to discuss your future with the company," he began, settling behind his desk with the kind of formal posture that suggested he had rehearsed this conversation. "Over the past several months, it's become clear that there's a fundamental misalignment between your working style and our organizational direction." I remained silent, curious to see how he would frame the situation. "You're clearly talented, and you've made valuable contributions to the company over the years. However, your tendency to operate outside established channels is creating confusion and undermining the systematic improvements we're trying to implement. People continue to come to you with problems instead of using proper procedures, which prevents our new processes from functioning as designed." The logic was breathtakingly circular. My effectiveness was being cited as evidence of my dysfunction, and the fact that colleagues trusted my judgment was being presented as a problem rather than an asset. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I think it would be beneficial for everyone if you transition to a more focused role that aligns better with our current organizational structure. We're prepared to offer you a position as a technical documentation specialist, which would involve creating systematic records of our processes and procedures. It would be a lateral move in terms of compensation, but it would allow you to contribute to the company's success in a way that supports our strategic direction." The offer was simultaneously insulting and revealing. Technical documentation specialist was essentially a clerical position that would involve writing instruction manuals for processes I had previously managed dynamically. It was the corporate equivalent of being demoted from conductor to sheet music transcriber. More telling was what the offer revealed about Blackwood's understanding of my actual value to the company. He apparently believed that my contribution could be reduced to documentation, that the relationships, contextual knowledge, and problem-solving expertise I had developed could be captured in written procedures and transferred to other employees. "Jonathan, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think that position would be a good fit for my skills and experience," I replied carefully. "Perhaps we should discuss this further after I've had some time to consider my options." His expression tightened slightly. "Marcus, I want to be clear about something. The informal coordination work you've been doing isn't sustainable as the company grows. We need systems that don't depend on individual relationships or institutional memory. You can either adapt to that reality, or you can continue to be frustrated by organizational changes that are necessary for our long-term success." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the essential message had been delivered. I could accept marginalization and demotion, or I could leave. Those were my only options. That weekend, I made my decision. I spent Saturday morning drafting my resignation letter, and I spent Saturday afternoon researching the employment contracts and non-compete agreements I had signed when joining the company. Sunday was devoted to planning my departure in a way that would be professional but also make the consequences of my leaving immediately apparent to the company's leadership. By Sunday evening, I had developed what I privately called my graceful exit strategy. I would submit my resignation with appropriate notice, offer to assist with knowledge transfer, and conduct myself with complete professionalism throughout the transition period. However, I would also ensure that my departure would immediately reveal the full scope of what the company was losing by undervaluing my contributions. The stage was set for the final act of my Peterson and Associates career, and I was ready to demonstrate exactly how replaceable I actually was. Monday morning, October 28th, arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made Seattle's skyline look like a postcard. I dressed more carefully than usual: charcoal gray suit, burgundy tie, polished black Oxford shoes. If this was going to be my final performance at Peterson and Associates, I wanted to look the part of a consummate professional. I arrived at the office 30 minutes earlier than my usual time, carrying a leather portfolio that contained several carefully prepared documents. The resignation letter was printed on premium paper and signed with my fountain pen, the same one my grandfather had given me when I graduated from college. Alongside it were detailed transition notes, client contact lists, and a comprehensive analysis of ongoing projects that would require immediate attention after my departure. The early morning gave me a quiet opportunity to complete one final task, sending individual emails to key contacts throughout the company and at client organizations. These messages were professionally worded notifications that I would be leaving Peterson and Associates, and that they should direct future communications through official company channel. However, the subtext was unmistakable. The person who had been their primary point of contact for coordination and problem-solving would no longer be available. At precisely 9:00 a.m., I knocked on Sarah Peterson's office door. She was reviewing quarterly financial reports on her computer screen, and the expression on her face suggested the numbers weren't particularly encouraging. The Meridian financial crisis was undoubtedly having broader financial implications beyond the immediate contract concern. "Marcus, come in," she said, gesturing toward the chairs in front of her desk. "I wasn't expecting to see you this morning. Is everything all right?" I placed the resignation letter on her desk with careful deliberation. "Sarah, I'm submitting my formal resignation from Peterson and Associates. My last day will be November 15th, giving the company the standard 2 weeks notice outlined in my employment contract." Her reaction was immediate and visceral. The color drained from her face as she picked up the letter and scanned its content. When she finished reading, she set it down slowly and looked directly at me with an expression that combined shock, frustration, and what might have been panic. "Marcus, this is completely unexpected. Can you help me understand what's prompting this decision? If there are issues we can address, I'd like the opportunity to discuss them before you make a final commitment to leaving." I had anticipated this question and prepared a response that was honest but diplomatic. "Sarah, over the past year it's become clear that my working style and the company's organizational direction are no longer compatible. I believe it's in everyone's best interest for me to pursue opportunities that better align with my professional skills and career objectives." She leaned back in her chair, processing the implications of my departure. "Marcus, I have to be honest, this timing is particularly challenging given the situation with Meridian Financial. Is there any possibility of postponing your departure until we've resolved the current crisis?" The request revealed exactly how much the leadership understood about my actual value to the company, despite months of public statements about my replaceability. In a moment of crisis, when formal systems had failed and client relationships were at risk, they were immediately turning to the person they had systematically marginalized. "I appreciate the complexity of the timing, but I've already committed to this decision." However, I've prepared comprehensive transition documentation, and I'm happy to work with whoever will be taking over my responsibilities to ensure a smooth handover." Sarah's expression shifted from shock to calculation. "Who exactly will be taking over your responsibility?" "I'm not sure we have anyone else with your specific combination of technical knowledge and client relationships." It was a question that cut to the heart of the organizational problems that had led to my resignation. Despite months of restructuring designed to eliminate dependencies on individual employees, the company had failed to create systematic replacements for the capabilities I provide. The formal processes looked impressive on paper but couldn't replicate the contextual knowledge and established relationships that made coordination actually work. "That's something the leadership team will need to determine," I said carefully. "I've documented all of my current projects and client relationships, and I'm available to train anyone who's assigned to transition into related responsibility." Our conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Sarah alternating between attempts to understand my decision and efforts to negotiate terms that might keep me with the company longer. She offered salary increases, expanded formal authority, and even the possibility of creating a new executive position that would formally recognize my coordination capabilities. Under different circumstances, these offers might have been compelling. However, they came too late and from the wrong person. The fundamental issue wasn't compensation or title. It was the company's philosophical commitment to organizational approaches that devalued the very capabilities they were now desperately trying to retain. After leaving Sarah's office, I scheduled a brief meeting with Jonathan Blackwood. This conversation was going to be more challenging because Blackwood had been the primary architect of the policies that had led to my decision to leave. However, professional courtesy required that I inform him directly about my resignation and offer to assist with transition planning. Blackwood's office reflected his corporate management philosophy, Everything was precisely organized, with motivational quotes about efficiency and teamwork displayed prominently on the wall. When I entered, he was conducting a phone call that apparently involved discussing performance metrics with someone at the company's human resources department. "Marcus, what can I do for you?" he asked after ending his call. His tone was cordial but carried an undertone of wariness, as if he suspected that my unscheduled visit might involve challenging his authority again. "Jonathan, I wanted to inform you that I've submitted my resignation to Sarah. My last day will be November 15th, and I'm available to work with you on transition planning for any responsibilities that fall under your operational oversight." His reaction was notably different from Sarah. Instead of shock or concern, his expression suggested something approaching satisfaction, as if my departure confirmed his analysis of the situation and validated his management approach. "Well, Marcus, I appreciate you giving appropriate notice, and I'm sure we can manage the transition effectively. As I've mentioned before, our goal is to build systems that don't depend on individual employees, so your departure will actually provide an opportunity to demonstrate the resilience of our new organizational structure." The response was perfectly consistent with his previous statements about my replaceability, but it also revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. Blackwood seemed to believe that my resignation would prove his theories about systematic management, when in reality it was about to provide a very public test of whether those theories actually worked in practice. "I've prepared detailed documentation about current projects and client relationships," I offered. "Would you like me to schedule meetings with your department heads to review the transition requirements?" "That won't be necessary," he replied confidently. "We have systems in place to handle these kinds of transitions. The project coordination manager can take over any interdepartmental communication responsibilities, and the client success director can manage ongoing account relationships. Our formal processes are designed to handle exactly these kinds of personnel changes." His confidence was both impressive and concerning. Either he genuinely believed that the formal systems could seamlessly replace my informal coordination work, or he was deliberately minimizing the significance of my departure to maintain his credibility with other employees. Over the following days, word of my resignation spread through the company with remarkable speed. The reactions varied dramatically depending on the individual's role and their previous experience working with me. Colleagues who had relied on my coordination assistance expressed concern and frustration about navigating future challenges through formal channels. Management personnel generally echoed Blackwood's confidence about systematic transitions and organizational resilience. The most interesting reactions came from our major clients, who began contacting the company directly to ask about the implications of my departure. These calls revealed something that the internal reorganization had obscured. Many of our most important business relationships were more personal than the leadership had realized. Dr. Elizabeth Chen from Meridian Financial was among the first to call. Her conversation with Sarah Peterson was brief and pointed, according to Rebecca Martinez, who overheard parts of it from the adjacent conference room. "I want to understand what Marcus Chen's departure means for our project timeline and technical implementation," Dr. Chen had apparently said. "He's been our primary technical contact for coordination issues, and his departure seems particularly concerning given the current project challenges." Similar calls came from executives at 3 other major clients: Harrison Manufacturing, Pacific Northwest Insurance, and Cascade Technology Solutions. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: clients expressing concern about continuity of service, and asking specific questions about how their account management would be affected by my departure. These client reactions created an immediate credibility problem for Blackwood's narrative about seamless transitions and systematic replacements. If the formal systems were truly adequate, clients shouldn't have been concerned about individual personnel change. The fact that they were expressing worries suggested that the informal relationships and personalized service approaches were more valuable than the official organizational structure acknowledged. By the end of my first week after submitting my resignation, it became clear that my departure was creating ripple effects throughout the company's operations. Project timelines were being questioned by clients who wanted assurance about technical continuity. Department heads were discovering gaps in communication channels that they hadn't previously recognized. Most significantly, Problems that had previously been resolved quickly through informal coordination were beginning to accumulate as unresolved issues. The Meridian Financial project, already in crisis mode, began experiencing additional complications as Dr. Chen and her team struggled to get answers to technical questions through the formal communication channel. The project coordination manager, despite being highly qualified, lacked the contextual knowledge necessary to understand why certain technical decisions had been made or how they related to the client's broader business objective. Meanwhile, I continued performing my regular duties with professional dedication while simultaneously preparing comprehensive transition materials. The documentation process was revealing just how extensive my informal coordination work had become over the year. Every day brought new discoveries about processes, relationships, and institutional knowledge that existed primarily in my experience, rather than in any systematic record. The transition documentation eventually filled 3 large binders and included detailed client profiles, project histories, technical troubleshooting guides, and relationship maps, showing how different departments and external organizations interconnected on various initiatives. As I compiled this information, I began to understand why Blackwood's formal systems had struggled to replicate the effectiveness of informal coordination. The relationships and contextual knowledge required for effective coordination were far more complex than any systematic process could easily capture. During my second week of notice, the consequences of my departure began accelerating. A critical technical issue arose with the Harrison manufacturing project, requiring immediate coordination between our infrastructure management team and the client's IT department. Under the previous informal system, I would have facilitated a direct conversation between the relevant technical experts and resolved the issue within hours. Instead, the problem was routed through the formal communication channel, which required the project coordination manager to schedule a meeting between department representatives, prepare briefing materials for people who lacked project context, and coordinate with the client success director to ensure proper account management protocols were followed. The process took 4 days and resulted in a solution that was technically adequate, but missed several optimization opportunities that I would have identified through my understanding of both the client's infrastructure and our internal capability. The Harrison manufacturing incident was followed by similar coordination breakdowns on 2 other major projects. In each case, the formal systems eventually produced solutions, but the time delays and missed optimization opportunities were creating client dissatisfaction and internal frustration. Most tellingly, people throughout the company began approaching me directly for advice on how to navigate the formal systems effectively. The very employees who were supposed to demonstrate the organization's independence from my coordination work were seeking my help in understanding how to make the new systems function. As my final week approached, the accumulated effects of these coordination breakdowns were becoming impossible to ignore. Project delays were mounting, client satisfaction scores were declining, and internal communications were becoming increasingly strained as departments struggled to work together effectively within the formal constraint. The irony was perfect. My departure was scheduled to prove the company's independence from individual contributions, but it was actually demonstrating exactly how dependent the organization had become on the informal coordination systems that formal processes had failed to replace. The stage was set for the final week when the theoretical principles of systematic management would face the practical test of actually managing operations without the informal networks that had made the system work. My final week at Peterson & Associates began on Monday, November 11th, with an emergency meeting that I wasn't invited to attend. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see Sarah Peterson, Jonathan Blackwood, and the department heads, engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly heated discussion. The body language alone told a story of escalating crisis and diminishing options. Rebecca Martinez found me at my desk around 10:30 a.m., carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had witnessed something she couldn't quite believe. She set 1 cup on my desk and settled into the chair across from me, glancing around to ensure we wouldn't be overheard. "Marcus, Meridian Financial just terminated their contract," she said in a hushed tone. "Dr. Chen called Sarah directly this morning and said they're invoking the performance failure clause, $40 million. The news hit like a physical blow. Even though I had anticipated this outcome for weeks, the Meridian Financial project had been deteriorating steadily since the formal systems had replaced the informal coordination networks, but the leadership had continued, believing they could salvage the situation through systematic process improvements. "What's the official explanation?" I asked, genuinely curious about how Blackwood would frame this disaster. Rebecca took a sip of her coffee before responding. "That's the interesting part." In the emergency meeting, Blackwood argued that the contract termination actually validates his approach because it eliminates a problematic client relationship that was preventing the company from operating efficiently. He's saying that Meridian Financial's expectations were incompatible with modern professional service delivery. The logic was breathtakingly audacious. Rather than acknowledging that the formal systems had failed to meet client expectations, Blackwood was reframing client expectations as unreasonable. It was a masterclass in corporate cognitive dissonance. When reality conflicts with theory, declare reality to be wrong. How did Sarah respond to that analysis? I asked. Not well. She pointed out that Meridian Financial has the same service expectations as our other major clients, and if we can't meet those expectations, we're going to lose more contracts. Blackwood insisted that the other clients would adapt to our improved service delivery model once they understood its benefits. The conversation revealed the fundamental philosophical divide that was tearing the company apart. Sarah understood that consulting firms succeed by adapting to client needs and expectations, while Blackwood believed that clients should adapt to consultant processes and systems. In the abstract, both perspectives had merit, but in practice, only one approach generated revenue. As Rebecca and I talked, my computer began receiving a steady stream of urgent emails from colleagues throughout the company. The Meridian Financial termination had created immediate practical problems that extended far beyond the lost revenue. The project had involved team members from all 4 departments, and its sudden cancellation was creating resolpation challenges, timeline disruptions, and client confidence issues that would require immediate attention. Under the previous informal coordination system, I would have spent the morning facilitating conversations between department heads to develop a comprehensive response plan. Team members would have been reassigned to other projects based on skills and availability. Client communication strategies would have been developed to prevent confidence spillover, and resource planning would have been adjusted to accommodate the revenue loss. Instead, the formal systems were producing a bureaucratic response that was both slower and less effective. The project coordination manager was scheduling meetings to discuss the termination's implications, but these meetings couldn't occur until later in the week due to scheduling conflict. The client success director was developing communication templates for other major accounts, but the templates required approval from multiple departments before they could be implemented. Most problematically, the individual department heads were making independent decisions about how to respond to the crisis without coordinating with each other. Enterprise Solutions was reassigning team members based purely on technical skill requirements, while business development was promising rapid service improvements to other clients without consulting about implementation feasibility. By Tuesday morning, the coordination breakdowns had accelerated beyond anything I had previously witnessed. The Infrastructure Management Department had committed to a major system upgrade for Pacific Northwest Insurance, without realizing that Enterprise Solutions had already promised the same resources to Cascade Technology Solutions for the same time period. Both projects were scheduled to begin the following Monday, and both clients had been assured they would receive dedicated attention from the company's top technical staff. The double booking disaster was discovered during a routine schedule review that happened to include representatives from both departments. According to Jennifer Walsh, the process improvement analyst, who had participated in the original operational audit, the meeting devolved into accusations and finger-pointing as each department insisted their client commitment took priority. "It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion," Jennifer confided during a chance encounter in the building's lobby. "Nobody could figure out how the schedules had gotten so misaligned, and everyone was blaming the formal tracking systems for not preventing the conflict. The irony was that the formal tracking systems were functioning exactly as designed, they were accurately recording the commitments each department had made independently. The problem was that there was no longer an effective mechanism for ensuring that those commitments were compatible with each other and with the company's overall resource constraints. Under the informal coordination system, I would have been aware of both client commitments as they developed and would have identified the potential conflict before it became a crisis. The informal communication networks that Blackwood had eliminated as inefficient had actually served as an early warning system that prevented exactly these kinds of problems. Wednesday brought news that Pacific Northwest Insurance was threatening to terminate their contract due to what they characterized as fundamental service delivery failures. The client had discovered the double booking situation when they attempted to confirm project start dates, and their executives were questioning whether Peterson and Associates had the organizational competence to handle complex implementation. The Pacific Northwest Insurance crisis was particularly damaging because it involved a long-standing client relationship that had been consistently profitable for over 5 years. Unlike Meridian Financial, which was a new and demanding client, Pacific Northwest Insurance had previously been satisfied with the company's service quality and had been planning to expand their engagement for the following year. The threat of losing a second major client within a week created panic throughout the company's leadership. Sarah Peterson called another emergency meeting, and this time the discussion was reportedly even more contentious than the previous session. Department heads were openly criticizing the formal coordination systems and arguing for immediate returns to more flexible operational approaches. Blackwood's response, according to multiple sources, was to double down on his systematic management philosophy. He argued that the recent problems were temporary growing pains that would resolve once employees fully adapted to the improved processes. He also suggested that the client service issues were actually beneficial because they would force the company to develop more robust and scalable operational capabilities. This response apparently prompted David Richardson to speak up for the first time in months. David had been marginalized under the new organizational structure, but his long tenure with the company and deep client relationships gave him credibility that was difficult to dismiss. "Jonathan, we're not dealing with growing pains," David reportedly said. "We're dealing with systematic coordination failures that are destroying our client relationships and threatening the company's survival. The informal networks that Marcus maintained weren't inefficiencies. They were what made our formal systems actually work." The meeting ended without resolution, but the philosophical battle lines were now clearly drawn. On one side was Blackwood, supported by the newly hired specialists who had invested their credibility in the formal systems approach. On the other side was a growing coalition of long-term employees who had witnessed the practical consequences of eliminating informal coordination networks. Elizabeth Chen called my direct line to ask about the technical implications of the Meridian Financial contract termination. She wanted to understand whether the coordination problems that had plagued their project were likely to affect the data security arrangements and intellectual property protections that had been established during the implementation. The conversation was professionally awkward because I was no longer officially responsible for client coordination, but Dr. Chen had been unable to get satisfactory answers through the formal communication channel. Her questions required detailed knowledge of both the technical implementation and the legal frameworks that had been established over the course of the project. "Marcus, I need straight answers about what happens to our data and our customized applications," she said with characteristic directness. "The people I've been talking to at your company seem to understand either the technical aspects or the contractual aspects, but nobody seems to understand how they connect to each other." Her observation perfectly captured the coordination problem that formal systems had created. The specialists who had replaced my informal coordination role were individually competent, but they lacked the comprehensive understanding necessary to address complex questions that crossed functional boundaries. I provided Chen with the information she needed, while carefully explaining that she should direct future questions through official company channels. However, the conversation reinforced my understanding of how much institutional knowledge was walking out the door with my departure. By Thursday afternoon, the accumulated stress of the crisis week was becoming visible throughout the company. Employees were working longer hours to compensate for coordination inefficiencies. Client communication was becoming increasingly strained, and internal meetings were growing more frequent and less productive. The project coordination manager, despite being highly qualified and genuinely committed to success, was showing signs of being overwhelmed by the scope of coordination challenges that the formal systems hadn't been designed to handle. She had been hired to manage systematic project workflows, but she was instead dealing with crisis management and damage control that required the kind of institutional knowledge and established relationships that couldn't be quickly developed. Similarly, the client success director was struggling to manage account relationships that had been built on personal trust and informal communication patterns. His formal communication templates were professionally appropriate but lacked the nuanced understanding of client personalities and preferences that effective relationship management required. Friday arrived with a sense of impending conclusion. It was my final day at Peterson & Associates, and the company was in the midst of its worst operational crisis in years. Two major clients had either terminated contracts or threatened termination. Coordination systems were breaking down across multiple departments, and the leadership was engaged in an increasingly bitter philosophical battle about organizational management approaches. As I prepared to leave the office for the last time, I reflected on the irony of the situation. The company had spent months, systematically, eliminating my unofficial coordination role because it represented dangerous dependency on individual expertise. Now, as that expertise walked out the door, the systematic replacements were proving inadequate to handle the complex coordination challenges that the business actually required. The stage was set for the weekend, when the accumulated coordination failures would continue developing without any possibility of informal intervention to prevent them from escalating into full departmental collapse. The theoretical principles of systematic management were about to face their ultimate practical test, and early indicators suggested that reality was going to prove far more challenging than theory had anticipated. My departure from Peterson & Associates was no longer just a personal career decision. It had become a case study in the hidden value of informal organizational networks and the dangerous consequences of undervaluing essential coordination capability. The weekend of November 16th was supposed to provide a brief respite from the crisis, allowing the leadership team to regroup and develop strategies for managing the operational challenges that had emerged during my final week. Instead, it became the catalyst for a complete organizational meltdown that would transform Peterson & Associates from a thriving consulting firm into a cautionary tale about the hidden costs of systematic management failure. Saturday morning brought the first sign that the weekend wouldn't provide the expected calm. Rebecca Martinez called my personal cell phone around 9 a.m., her voice tight with stress and disbelief. "Marcus, you need to know what's happening. The Harrison manufacturing system went down last night, and nobody can figure out how to bring it back online. They're trying to reach you because the technical documentation doesn't include the troubleshooting procedures for the custom configurations you implement." The Harrison manufacturing system was a complex enterprise integration that I had designed and implemented over 18 months, involving multiple software platforms and custom interfaces that required specific restart sequences when technical problems occurred. The formal documentation included standard operating procedures, but it didn't capture the nuanced troubleshooting knowledge that came from hands-on experience with the system's particular quirks and dependencies. "Have they contacted infrastructure management?" I asked, knowing that the department was officially responsible for ongoing technical support. "That's the problem," Rebecca replied. "Infrastructure management says the issue involves custom business logic that's outside their standard support protocol. Enterprise Solutions says it's an infrastructure problem that's not covered by their development responsibility. Client Relations doesn't have the technical expertise to communicate with Harrison's IT team, and the project coordination manager is trying to schedule a Monday meeting to determine who should take responsibility." The situation perfectly illustrated how the elimination of informal coordination networks had created gaps where critical problems could fall between departments without anyone taking ownership. Under the previous system, I would have been contacted directly and would have resolved the issue within hours, regardless of which department's formal responsibilities were involved. "I can't provide direct technical support since I no longer work for the company," I explained, "but they should contact the system vendor's emergency support line and reference the custom configuration documentation that's filed under project number." Saturday afternoon brought news that the Harrison manufacturing crisis had escalated dramatically. The system outage was preventing the client from processing customer orders, and their executives were demanding immediate resolution under the service level agreements that guaranteed 99.5% uptime for critical business systems. Jonathan Blackwood had been contacted at home and had attempted to coordinate a response using the formal communication channels, but the weekend duty staff lacked both the technical expertise and the authorization to implement the complex troubleshooting procedures required. The vendor's emergency support team had been contacted, but they needed guidance from someone who understood the custom integrations that weren't covered in their standard documentation. By Sunday morning, Harrison Manufacturing was threatening legal action for breach of contract, and their system had been offline for more than 36 hours. The financial implications were staggering beyond the immediate service penalty fees. The company faced potential liability for the business losses that Harrison Manufacturing was experiencing due to the extended outage. Sarah Peterson made the decision to contact me directly, calling my cell phone at 8:30 a.m. with what amounted to a desperate plea for assistance. "Marcus, I know this is irregular, but we need your help with the Harrison Manufacturing situation. The system has been down since Friday night, and none of our current staff can identify the problem or implement a solution. Would you be willing to provide consulting assistance on an emergency basis?" The request placed me in a difficult ethical position. On one hand, I no longer worked for Peterson and Associates, and had no formal obligation to assist with their operational crises. On the other hand, Harrison Manufacturing's business operations were being severely impacted by a problem that I could potentially resolve quickly. "Sarah, I'm sympathetic to the situation, but I think it's important for your team to develop the capability to handle these issues independently. However, I can provide you with the contact information for the original system architect at the vendor company, who should be able to guide your technical team through the troubleshooting process." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Sarah alternating between professional requests for assistance and increasingly personal appeals for help. She offered substantial consulting fees, expedited rehiring with improved terms, and even equity participation in the company's future growth. What became clear during our discussion was that the leadership had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my contributions to the company. They had viewed my coordination work as a collection of specific tasks that could be systematically replicated, when in reality it involved contextual knowledge, established relationships, and problem-solving expertise that had developed organically over years of hands-on experience. Sunday afternoon brought news that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the crisis. Pacific Northwest Insurance had decided not to wait for resolution of their scheduling conflict and had formally terminated their contract, citing systematic service delivery failures that indicate fundamental organizational dysfunction. The Pacific Northwest Insurance termination was devastating not just because of the immediate revenue loss, but because of the precedent it set for other clients who were already questioning the company's operational reliability. Within hours of the termination announcement, Cascade Technology Solutions had requested an emergency meeting to review service delivery expectations and contingency planning. More ominously, 3 smaller clients had sent formal notices requesting detailed information about Peterson and Associates' business continuity planning and technical support capability. These requests suggested that word about the operational difficulties was spreading through the professional networks that connected the company's client base. Monday morning, November 18th, brought a cascade of developments that transformed isolated crises into complete organizational collapse. The Harrison Manufacturing system remained offline, entering its 4th day of outage with mounting financial liability. The infrastructure management department was in crisis mode, with team members working around the clock to address problems they didn't fully understand. Enterprise Solutions was fielding angry calls from multiple clients about service quality issues and communication breakdowns. Most significantly, the crisis had reached the attention of the company's financial stakeholders. Peterson and Associates operated with substantial credit facilities that were secured by client contracts and revenue projections. The loss of 2 major clients within a single week had triggered covenant review processes that could potentially restrict the company's access to working capital. The business development department, already struggling to manage client retention issues, was now facing the additional challenge of explaining organizational stability to prospective clients who were hearing negative reports about service quality and operational reliability. New business development had essentially ground to a halt, as the team focused on damage control and relationship management. Client relations was experiencing a complete breakdown of normal operation. The formal communication protocols that Blackwood had implemented were proving entirely inadequate for crisis management and damage control. Clients wanted direct access to technical experts and senior leadership, but the formal channels required routing all communications through designated account managers, who often lacked the expertise to address complex questions. By Tuesday, November 19th, the situation had deteriorated to the point where individual employees were beginning to make independent decisions about their future with the company. 3 senior consultants in enterprise solutions submitted resignations, citing deteriorating working conditions and uncertainty about organizational stability. The resignation of experienced technical staff created immediate operational problems for ongoing projects. These consultants possessed specialized knowledge about client implementations and technical architectures that wasn't easily transferable to other team members. Their departure meant that several major projects would face delays or quality issues that could trigger additional client dissatisfaction. Jennifer Walsh, the process improvement analyst who had been brought in to implement Blackwood's systematic management approaches, submitted her resignation with a detailed letter that provided a scathing analysis of the organizational failures she had witnessed. The formal systems that were implemented with the intention of improving operational efficiency have instead created coordination failures, communication breakdowns, and institutional knowledge losses that are threatening the company's survival, she wrote. The elimination of informal coordination networks has removed the organizational flexibility and responsiveness that consulting clients require. Wednesday brought the news that would ultimately seal the company's fate. Cascade Technology Solutions, the company's oldest and most stable client relationship, announced that they were exploring alternative service providers due to concerns about Peterson and Associates' organizational stability and service delivery capability. The potential loss of Cascade Technology Solutions represented more than just another client termination. It signaled the complete collapse of the company's reputation in the Seattle consulting market. Cascade's executives were well connected throughout the regional business community, and their decision to seek alternative providers would inevitably influence other organizations' perceptions of Peterson and Associates' viability. By Thursday, November 21st, the operational crisis had evolved into an existential threat to the company's survival. The accumulated client losses had reduced monthly recurring revenue by more than 60%, while the ongoing operational chaos was preventing effective efforts to retain remaining clients or develop new business. The infrastructure management department had essentially collapsed under the weight of technical support issues they couldn't resolve. Team members were working excessive hours to address problems that required expertise the department no longer possessed, and several key personnel were showing signs of severe stress and burnout. Enterprise Solutions was struggling to maintain project schedules with a reduced staff and limited coordination support. Client satisfaction scores were declining rapidly as project delays and communication failures created frustration and uncertainty about service quality. Business development had been forced to suspend most new client acquisition activities to focus on retention efforts that were proving largely unsuccessful. The company's reputation for operational excellence had been replaced by concerns about organizational competence and service reliability. Sarah Peterson called an all-hands meeting for Friday morning to address what she characterized as temporary operational challenges and strategic repositioning opportunities. However, by Thursday evening, word had leaked that the meeting would actually involve announcing major layoffs and potential company closure. Friday, November 22nd, exactly 4 weeks after I had submitted my resignation, Peterson and Associates held its final all-hands meeting. Sarah Peterson announced that the company would be ceasing operations by the end of December, citing insurmountable operational challenges and client relationship failures that have made continued business operations financially unsustainable. The announcement was followed by individual meetings where employees were informed about severance arrangements, final project responsibilities and assistance with job placement services. The company that had once employed over 180 people would be reduced to a skeleton crew focused solely on managing the closure process and fulfilling final obligations to remaining clients. Jonathan Blackwood's resignation was announced simultaneously with the company closure. He accepted a position with a management consulting firm in Chicago where he would apparently continue implementing systematic management approaches for organizations that hadn't yet learned the lessons that Peterson and Associates had discovered too late. In the weeks that followed, I received calls from several former colleagues who wanted to understand what had gone wrong and how the situation might have been prevented. The conversations revealed that many employees had recognized the coordination problems that formal systems had created, but they had assumed that leadership understood the issues and would make necessary adjustments. The most poignant call came from David Richardson, my original mentor who had accepted a position with a smaller consulting firm and was helping several former Peterson and Associates clients transition to new service providers. "Marcus, I keep thinking about how different things might have been if we had recognized the value of what you were doing instead of trying to systematize it out of existence," he said during our conversation. The irony is that Blackwood was right about one thing: we did need to eliminate dangerous dependencies on individual employees. We just eliminated the wrong dependent. 6 months later, I was established in a senior consulting role with a firm that understood the importance of both systematic processes and flexible coordination network. Several former Peterson and Associates clients had followed me to the new company, and I was helping them implement the kinds of integrated solutions that had previously made our work successful. The story of Peterson and Associates became a case study in business schools and management consulting programs as an example of how organizational theory can conflict with operational reality. Students learned about the importance of understanding informal networks, the risks of over-systemization, and the hidden costs of undervaluing essential coordination capabilities. But for me, the most important lesson was simpler and more personal. When someone tells you that you're easily replaceable, the best response isn't to argue, it's to give them the opportunity to prove their point. Sometimes the most powerful demonstration of your value is showing exactly what happens when that value is no longer available. The company that had called me replaceable discovered too late that some contributions are irreplaceable, not because of individual uniqueness, but because of the complex systems of knowledge, relationships, and expertise that develop organically over time. When those systems are dismantled in favor of formal processes, the results can be catastrophic, and sometimes watching that catastrophe unfold is the most satisfying resignation letter you could ever write. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest upload.